Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. And I do want to thank you for attending this afternoon right following lunch. So in an effort to make things simpler and easier for our webinar participants, we're offering a couple of audio features. So you can either listen through the speakers on your computer or through headphones, or you can call in. And also, just to make things a little bit easier on that note, everyone by default is muted. And so that's to really eliminate background noise. So if you have a question during the webinar, there are a couple of things you could do. You could type your question into the questions log box, which is on the right-hand side on the GoToMeeting panel, or you could raise your hand. So there should be a little hand there, and we can unmute you, and you can ask your question over the phone or on the computer, or however you're connected. And we'll stop in the middle for questions as well as stop at the end. So if we don't get to your question right away, we'll get to it at the end. So today is part 2 of a series of building a successful mentoring program using the Mentor Michigan Quality Program Standards, and it's going to focus on orientation and training. So on your screen, you're going to see the 11 quality program standards for youth mentoring. And so today we're addressing Standard 4, which is orientation and training. And there are going to be, we have other webinars that we're hosting on each of these other topics. So stay tuned for those. So let's just begin with a brief history of the quality program standards for youth mentoring. So these standards were developed by the Mentor Michigan Providers Council. The Providers Council is a group that provides expertise and ideas to Mentor Michigan as it implements its activities. So the council consists of up to 20 individuals that represent diverse mentoring programs, organizations, and collaborations from across the state. So we've got representatives from community-based programs, school-based programs, faith-based, higher education institutions, local mentoring collaboratives, volunteer centers, as well as national service programs. And they develop the standards and are also working to develop some edits and updates that we'll discuss in just a minute. So the standards aren't meant to really certify or accredit mentoring programs. They're meant to be used as a planning and assessment framework that raises the bar for mentoring programs. Even the Providers Council members that wrote these standards do not meet them all, but they do believe that these are the elements that every program should be striving for. And each one of the standards are based on research and evidence-based practices as well as the national elements of effective practice. In addition to the standards, the Providers Council also developed a self-assessment checklist. The purpose of the checklist is to provide youth mentoring programs with a tool for self-assessment. As programs work to continually improve their operations and services to the communities they serve, this checklist can provide benchmarks for progress. So programs should be using this instrument to determine both potentials of area improvement and to identify those components of quality youth mentoring that are strengths of the organization. So the quality program standards as well as the self-assessment checklist are available for download on our website at mentormichigan.org. So like I said before, the Providers Council is currently making revisions and updates to the standards as well as enhancements to the checklist. So just keep an eye out for the release of these. And I'm going to pass it over to Amber Troop, who is the Mentor Michigan Director, to get delve more into the orientation and training piece of today's webinar.
Great, Katie, thank you. So as Katie mentioned, in this session we're going to look at the essential elements of a comprehensive orientation plan for your mentors, your mentees, and parents and guardians of the youth that you're serving. We're also going to explore what should be included in the mentor training process and the importance of these sessions to the success of your matches. So although these are very large topics that we're going to try and tackle in a 1-hour document or webinar, we hope that by the end of our discussion you'll be able to do a few things. First, that you'll be able to describe the purposes, goals, and objectives of both orientation and training sessions for all parties involved, including the mentors, the mentees, and then the mentees' parents and guardians. And then that you can identify key topics to incorporate into those orientation and training sessions. So again, it's important that you note that these are critical components of a mentoring program, and obviously we can't fully develop and explore these topics in just a 1-hour webinar. However, this will provide you with the basic information of what should be included in your mentoring program's orientation and training plan, and then we'll direct you to places you can go to get further resources and information on these topics. And as always, if you have individual needs or questions following this webinar, Mentor Michigan can assist you as well. So we're going to kick off our webinar today with a quick poll. And we want to know if your program has an orientation plan for either mentors, mentees, parents and guardians, or all of the above. So just take a quick moment and complete this poll. And Katie, how's our response rate going?
We had about 79 people vote, and here are the 79% vote. Sorry, and here are the results on the screen.
Great. So it looks like 32% of you have an orientation plan for your mentors, 21% have a plan for your mentees, and then 53% of you have a plan for all of the above. So we hope that by the end of today's webinar, you'll understand the importance of having an orientation plan for all of these parties. And if you're not already including a plan for one of these groups, hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll have some ideas about how and why you should consider this orientation component for those individuals in your program. So today, the webinar is focusing on Standard 4 of Mentor Michigan's Quality Program Standards for Youth Mentoring. And once again, this standard explores orientation and training. And really, the standard says that the program provides each mentor, mentee, and parent or guardian of the mentee with orientation and training support materials. And that this is done by trained staff or volunteers and are held prior to the match. So this orientation includes things like program orientation for the mentor, mentee, and parent or guardian. It also includes program training, and then ongoing training sessions as necessary. And then finally, ample opportunity for interaction with the assigned program staff, and in most cases, that's the case manager from the mentoring program that's assigned to support that particular match. The National Mentoring Partnership recommends 6 hours of training for mentors before matching. And this training really is to help prepare mentors for their role, and it should provide them with knowledge to deal with situations that might arise when they're working with young people. It's recommended that mentees also receive orientation and training to help prepare them for their responsibilities in the match. Some youth mentoring programs conduct orientation and training for potential mentors, mentees, and parents or guardians of the mentees maybe once per year. And then other organizations conduct orientation and training as often as once a month. Sometimes they're done in groups, and sometimes they're done individually. So it doesn't matter what form it takes. What matters is that they're conducted in a way that meets the needs of every person who's considering joining your program. And it's important that you have a plan for this, and the same information should be presented to everyone who attends orientation and training. One of the major reasons for conducting orientation and training before any matches are made is that this orientation and training can be used as part of the total volunteer screening process. Orientation and training can provide you with some additional opportunities to get to know potential mentors, to understand their interests, and to get to know their personalities. And you can really use this information when deciding whether to, first of all, accept them into the program, and then ultimately when making your matches. The content of the orientation and training sessions should differ, so it's important to have a distinction. The orientation should include, it should be an opportunity to introduce the program to the prospective mentors, mentees, and parents and guardians so that they can make an informed decision about whether to participate. So it's not just you as the mentoring program making that decision, but that they are making an informed decision about whether this is the right program for them. And when mentees and mentors are invested in the relationship, the chances for success are much greater. So this is really a critical component of starting this match off on the right foot. The program orientation for the mentor, mentee, and parent and guardian clearly outlines the program and should include the following information. So it's important to have a program overview, a clear program description, a description of the mentor and mentee eligibility and time commitment, and then program benefits and rewards. And the orientation plans for the mentors and mentees, and then also for the parents or guardians, should outline some of the same information, but need to be separate sessions tailored to the unique needs of each group. So we're going to go a little deeper into each one of those things now, starting with the mentee orientation plan. Quite often the mentee orientation is similar to or done at the same time as that of the orientation for the parent or guardian, and it should include the following things. First of all, an introduction to the concept of mentoring, and it should address some of the following issues. So first of all, what mentoring is and how it can benefit both mentors and young people, because we know it benefits both groups. And then second, the nature of the mentor-mentee relationship and the level of personal involvement that's involved. Second, there should be an age-appropriate overview of your program. So it's important to consider the age group of the kids that you're orienting to the program and making sure that you're tailoring this in a way that is easy for them to understand. So you'll want to have a different plan for the 5-year-olds that you're bringing into your program versus the 12-year-olds, for example. So in that overview, you should include your program goals. You should talk about the roles and responsibilities for the mentees, the mentors, and the parents and guardians, and then also the program staff. And quite often we're focused on the roles and responsibilities of the mentors, but it's equally as important to make sure the mentees know what they need to do and what they can expect, and the same thing for the parents and guardians. And it's really important for all parties to understand what the staff members of the mentoring organization are going to provide as well. And then finally, the level of commitment expected, including the time, the flexibility, and frequency. So you should be upfront about what your requirements are for your program. The next slide highlights a few more points to include in the mentee orientation plan. So a discussion of your program's policies and procedures, and included in this should be a summary of the program's policies, including those governing privacy, reporting, communication, and evaluation. That you'll collect the application and consent forms and any other necessary paperwork at this time, and that you'll provide a schedule of the next steps, including mentee training, if that's applicable to your program, the matching process, and group activities. If you have those available, it's important for them to understand and know when they can expect to participate in those activities. Next, you should address the youth participants' concerns about mentoring or those of their parents and guardians. And you should be prepared to ask questions such as, who is this person, this mentor that I'm going to be spending time with? And what can mentoring do for me? How much time will this relationship take? And is all of this time and effort really worth it? So the parents and guardians and mentees will have some questions for you about, they're making an investment in this program, and they're going to need some clarity on some of the things that you're going to discuss during this orientation plan. So you should make sure to allow a time for them to ask those questions, and that you're also prepared to answer all of those questions. You want to make sure you give the mentee the chance to talk about what they want to get out of that mentoring relationship. So they're going to come in with some expectations as well, and you're going to want to hear what those are so you can make sure you address those and incorporate those as appropriate. And you want to make sure the mentees and the parents or guardians have enough time and enough information to make an informed decision about whether or not they should participate in this program. It's really important that when the mentees are invested in the relationship, that match is more likely to succeed. So you want to make sure they understand and they're making the decision to participate in the program as well. Moving on to the mentor orientation plan. Remember, it's important that this is a separate and distinct orientation from what you do with the mentor or with the mentees and the parents or guardians. So this should include things like a program overview of your mentoring program. So this will repeat some of the components you had in other orientation plans. So you're going to identify your program goals, discuss the general need for mentoring and your program's need for mentors, and talk a little bit about the mentee characteristics and the criteria for participation. So participation for mentors and then also the participation of the mentees so they start to understand the characteristics of some of these kids that they're going to be working with in your program. You should focus on establishing expectations for the mentors, mentees, and program staff. So you should describe the expectations of the mentors. And again, this should include the time and frequency of meetings, relationship duration, any paperwork requirements you have, and other policies and procedures that your program has in place. You should describe what mentors can expect from program staff. What kind of support are you going to provide? What sort of follow-up do you offer? What are other things that they can expect from your program staff? So they're a really critical component, and we know from research, and we also see this every year in the Mentor Michigan Census, that matches that receive more support and follow-up from the mentoring programs are more successful and more likely to last. So you should always be thinking about how you're going to support this relationship on an ongoing basis, not just at the beginning of the match. You should explain the expectations of the mentees, including their commitment to the program, willingness to follow the rules, and other things. So some of the stuff that you go over with the mentees during their orientation, you'll want to share with the mentors as well. And then, really important, provide a timeline for the screening process from the application through matching. So it's really important that your volunteers understand what this process looks like, and that when they meet with you during the orientation and they fill out their application and their paperwork, they need to understand that that process is going to take some time. So depending on the types of background checks you run, the references that you check, quite often that can take a few weeks or more depending on the size of your organization and how many volunteers you're trying to screen at a time. I've talked with volunteers in the past that have applied to be a part of a mentoring program and have filled out an application and given permission to do their background check screening and then don't hear from the program for several weeks, and then they start to wonder if something's wrong or if there was a reason why they perhaps were not being considered for the program, and there was no issue. The issue was that the mentoring program was still processing the background check and still doing their reference checks, and eventually they did follow up with those volunteers and they were accepted into the program. But when a large amount of time goes by and you haven't clearly explained to the volunteer what they can expect, sometimes they might assume that they're not a good fit for your program and might pursue a different volunteer opportunity. So in order to keep those volunteers engaged in your program, you need to communicate with them during that process and up front so they understand what to expect. And then a couple more points for your mentor orientation plan. You need to discuss program policies and procedures, and in this piece you will describe the eligibility and screening process for mentors, as well as the process for matching. You'll explain your program policies regarding confidentiality, privacy, liability, anything else you need to cover related to your policies and procedures. You'll also talk about program policies for outside meetings if that applies to your program. So in some cases, if you're a school-based or a site-based program, what are your policies and procedures with regards to communication outside of that school-based or site-based meeting? Do you allow for it? And if so, what does that match need to do in order to have proper permission to do that? And then also at this time, you should complete any forms you need to fill out for the mentor, have the mentor fill out. So things like their application, their background check permission form, references, and then hopefully you'll be ready to register them for an upcoming mentor training session so they can roll right from the orientation to the training. And then finally, it's important to provide a realistic view of mentoring and the young people that your mentoring program serves. So you should make sure to, first of all, discuss the mentor expectations for the relationship and stress that mentoring is not a quick fix and that it takes time to see results. So often in the recruitment of volunteers, we talk about the benefits of mentoring. And we all know that there are tremendous benefits for mentoring, but we also know that those don't happen overnight. So when we talk about things like improved social skills, improved grades, better attendance, all of those things that we talk about, we know that that doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes mentors become frustrated because they don't see those improvements in the kids that they're working with quickly enough. It's important up front to talk with them about what sort of expectations they should have for the match and where that match might be in 6 months or a year and beyond, so they're not frustrated by sometimes the slowness of those changes within the kids that they're working with. And then finally, briefly describe the characteristics of the young people that you serve and the challenges you face. This topic should be covered in more detail in the initial and the ongoing training for the mentor. So if you work with a special population like youth in foster care or children of incarcerated parents, if there's special challenges related to the group of kids that you serve, it's important to give the volunteers an overview of those characteristics so they understand who they're going to be working with. So at this time, we're going to pause briefly and take whatever questions you have at this time. So once again, feel free to type your question into the questions box or raise your hand and Katie can unmute you so you can ask your question over the phone.
We did have a question about the slides. We're going to be posting the slides for this presentation on our SlideShare account, and I'll put the link into the chat box here in a second, but I'll do that this afternoon after the webinar. We're also recording this webinar, so if you wanted to go and find the recording later, I can post that for you as well.
Great, Katie, thank you. Are there any other questions that are coming in?
I don't see any coming in at this time.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on with the presentation. We'll pause again in a couple more places throughout the presentation. So if you do have questions, feel free to send them as soon as they come up, and Katie will make sure that we get those addressed as soon as we have time, and certainly before the end of the presentation. So moving on now to looking at program training. So after the orientation session, the mentor should receive information that's much more in-depth in the program training. So this program training, which should take place in one or in some cases multiple sessions, it should last a minimum of 2 hours and should include a variety of topics from a discussion regarding building a healthy mentoring relationship to establishing boundaries. Some mentoring programs do this, once again, in as little as 2 hours, and what's ideal is really 6 hours. These 13 issues that are shown on the slide are the topics outlined in Standard 4. for an effective mentor training session. So these are the things that you should have in place and should cover throughout your program training. The mentor training is one of the most important factors affecting the success and duration of the match, and also impacting mentor satisfaction and then ultimately the mentor retention. We know that, we know that many volunteers will come in and they'll make a commitment to meet with one youth for a minimum of one school year or one calendar year, but they don't stay on and they don't continue either on with that match or get rematched with another individual. And quite often what we hear is they don't stay on because they didn't either feel supported by their program or feel like they had the proper training and tools to be successful. So this is really a critical component to have in place in order to have the best possible matches that you can have. Public-Private Ventures, which is a national nonprofit agency, and they do a lot of research in the mentoring field. They've looked at mentoring relationships and their successes and failures pretty extensively. And they determined that most mentors are dissatisfied because they're not adequately prepared for their roles as mentors, and they don't have essential information about the characteristics of the youth. So again, it's just really critical that you provide this information to your volunteers up front and properly train them and orient them to your program so they can be successful with the matches that you make. So we're just curious. We're going to do another poll here. We want to know how much training you provide to your mentors. Do you do 6 hours or more? Do you do 4 to 5 hours, 2 to 3 hours, 1 to 2 hours, or do you simply not offer training yet, or you're not sure what sort of training your agency offers? Go ahead and take a moment to complete this poll.
We had the same percentage of people, or actually we had 83% this time, and here are the results.
Great. Well, 11% of you do 6 hours or more, which is wonderful. 5% of you do 4 to 5 hours. 37% of you do 2 to 3 hours, 26% 1 to 2, and then 21% either do not offer training or are not sure. So kind of a wide range of where your programs are at with regards to mentor training. So hopefully, as we talk through some of the resources here in a few minutes and look at some of the components of proper mentor training, you'll look to see where your program can either enhance or improve the training that you offer.
Hey, Amber, we did have a question come in about the last slide in the public-private venture study.
Sure.
They wanted to know if there was more information about what type of characteristics they wanted to know more about, like was it personality, needs, family situation, etc. Do you happen to know that?
I would have to pull the study to provide some more depth on that, but we can certainly send that out to the participants after today's webinar and look at that study in more depth. Quite often this refers to specific populations that your programs are working with. So we had referenced things like children in foster care, children of incarcerated parents. We have a lot of programs. There's several programs that work with youth that are involved in the juvenile justice system. And then in some cases we have youth or programs that are serving youth with specific disabilities. So really what's most important and one of the things that this study and other research has shown is that depending on the goals of your program and the unique needs of the populations that you're trying to serve, it's important for you to prepare your mentors accordingly. We all know that, I think those of you that are working with youth in foster care will see that there's especially some very unique needs related to serving that population. Some of your programs that kind of don't have a specific population that you're serving, in some respects you're tackling all of these issues and not just one. So it's important that you tailor your training as much as you can to meet the specific needs of the volunteers based on the kids that you're matching them with. Anything else, Katie?
Nope, that's it for now.
Okay. So we're going to move on and talk again about the importance of an orientation and training process. So we gave you some information earlier in the presentation, but less than 30% of at-risk youth are actively engaged in a mentoring relationship, and most of the experts point to ineffective mobilization practices, so turning interested volunteers into mentors, as one of the reasons more youth are not in mentoring relationships. And that nearly 80% of mentors report that they were never trained in areas that are critical to retention and effectiveness. So what's the result of that? That means as many as 90% of our potential mentors drop out before they ever establish a relationship with an at-risk youth. We see this every year in our Mentor Michigan census, and we've started to ask about retention of volunteers. And we know that your programs and programs throughout the state are working very hard year-round to recruit volunteers for your program. But the challenge is, I think, we're so focused on recruitment of new mentors that we're not doing everything we can do to retain our current mentors. So what are we doing with all of that recruitment? We're simply kind of filling the gaps of the people that are dropping off. We're not really growing the field as dramatically as we could if we were as focused on retention as we are on recruitment. So training for mentors should answer the why, what, and how questions of being an effective mentor. So the training should address the why component. So mentors need to be reminded why being a mentor is an important and worthwhile job for youth and for our communities. And then the what refers to what is the role of the mentor. The how comes back to how do mentors relate, how can mentors and mentees better understand each other, and how can this relationship move forward in a positive way. The mentors are investing their time and themselves to make the lives of the kids that they're serving better, and it's important that the coordinators help them make sure that their investment has a reward for everybody involved. And this training, both initially and on an ongoing basis, is the way to make that happen. So in order for us to see all of the benefits and wonderful things that we know mentoring can do, it's important that we're investing in our volunteers so they're equipped and able to do that. And while orientation and training before a match is made is extremely important, the ongoing support for the mentor and mentee is also essential. The program should provide ongoing training sessions as necessary and an ample opportunity for interaction with the assigned program staff or the case manager. And continued match support is going to be that key for mentor retention. And again, that research shows that youth with the longest matches receive the most benefits from mentoring. So these are key components to ensuring that you're creating long-lasting matches within your organization. So I'm going to pass it back to Katie to share some resources with you about how you can move forward. I know this is a very brief overview of orientation and training, but hopefully this gives you something to think about and allows you the opportunity to pause and assess whether or not your program is hitting those characteristics and things that should be included in the orientation and training plan. And if not, that you look to some of these resources that Katie's going to share with you about how you can improve some of those components of your program. So Katie, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thanks, Amber. So I'm sure after you got all that information, you're wondering, now what? What do I do with all of this? The first step, if you haven't done so already, is really to download the quality program standards for youth mentoring, as well as the checklist. So a lot of those big lists that we offered and the different bullet points of what you should include, that's all within the checklist and within the standards themselves. So if you didn't get a chance to write all those down, so make sure you go through that checklist and help to determine, potential areas of improvement that you need within your program, and also to identify those components that are really strengths of your organization And so you can see, okay, here's our strengths, let's continue to do that, and then turn around, okay, now it's time to focus on these things that we're not so strong on. So like I said, they can be downloaded for free on our website at www.mentormichigan.org. Secondly, Mentor, which is the National Mentoring Partnership, has developed the elements of effective practice as well as a complementary toolkit. So Mentor is kind of the national version of us, and the Elements is kind of the national version of the quality program standards. And so those are available for free download from their website, and their website is mentoring.org. And so the great thing about this toolkit is that there are concrete resources and samples for different things that you might need for your program. So in relation to this, there's sample mentor and mentee orientation plans, sample training outlines, and much more. And those are really free for anyone to use and customize as needed. Thirdly, make sure you go back and look at your program policies and procedures. What are your screening, orientation, and training plans consist of currently? And also, are these procedures being fully implemented on a consistent basis? So with every mentor, with every mentee, with every parent, are you doing the same types of orientation and training? And also, it's important, are they part of a larger volunteer screening plan? So when you're doing that orientation piece, are you continuing to watch and make sure it's the same people who are, say, doing the interviews that are in this thing, so it's that consistent person that might be looking for clues to who to match them with, or if they should match them, or if they should not include them in the program. Also, are there free resources or tools that you could share with other staff members? So this webinar or the toolkit or the elements or anything like that that you could be sending around your office. So visit the Mentor Michigan website again to explore all the handouts and resources and related information. There's also a link to the Mentor's website. There's just a ton of resources available on our website as well as others, and several resources related directly to the information presented in this webinar. So orientation and training, while they're very important pieces of your program's overall policies and procedures to create those close and effective mentoring matches, however, there are additional steps that programs must integrate into their daily operations to create those high-quality programs and ultimately to better serve our young people. You have to recruit participants, for example, before you can train them, and you have to create a strategy for monitoring, supporting, and retaining mentors before you match them with the youth. And all of these things, you know, the one step relates to the previous and relates to the next. And so it's all part of this larger process of creating strong and long-lasting relationships to really benefit the youth and see those positive outcomes. So over the next few months, like I said before, we're going to be offering several webinar opportunities that you can look forward to. Today's webinar is part of a larger series on building a successful mentoring program that's based on those quality program standards for youth mentoring. In a webinar we did last month, we focused on the definition of mentoring and then also recruitment. And if you missed it, we do have the link for the recording of that. And next month, we're going to be focusing on matching strategy and monitoring matches. And then looking forward even more in April, we're going to be looking at mentor support, recognition, and retention, as well as match closure procedures. So those, all those webinars that we're doing over the first 4 months of the year are going to be very effective at giving you a general idea of those standards. And then in addition to really supplement that Building a Successful Mentoring Program series, we're going to be hosting webinars providing information and resources around mentoring children of incarcerated parents, recruiting male mentors, and then resources for new mentoring programs and new staff members. So first, through the Mentoring a Promising Intervention for Children of Prisoners webinar, which we're going to be hosting right at the beginning and the middle of March, participants, we're going to be gaining really a better understanding of children of prisoners so that they can better serve this population. The topics that we're going to cover are going to include the scope of the problem, the life circumstances facing children and their parents at the time of incarceration, the impact of the incarceration on children from a developmental perspective, and the potential benefits that different types of intervention may provide, of course including mentoring. Secondly, we know that recruiting male mentors is one of the toughest challenges that mentoring programs face in Michigan. And Mentor Michigan has created a toolkit designed to provide program staff and their trained mentor recruiters with language and tips to use while they're making that ask to men. So the Men in Mentoring Toolkit webinar that we're going to be hosting in March will explore all the resources, and it'll really take you through those steps to recruit male mentors in a variety of settings, and it addresses the main components of a complete recruitment message, which we know is very effective for both men and women. Thirdly, please join Mentor Michigan during one of our resources for new mentoring programs and new staff webinars. And in these webinars, we have provided an overview of Mentor Michigan, the quality program standards, and then other useful resources for new mentoring programs, as well as those starting a mentoring program or new staff members within an existing agency. So for an up-to-date listing and to register for any of these opportunities, they're all listed on the Training and Technical Assistance page of our website. So I see a question here about accessing the definition plan and recorded webinar, and I can send out the link for the recording for the first webinar that we did after this, and then also within the follow-up email that you get if you wanted the recording for this webinar we just did to share with others, that will also be available. So I can get that out to you via email. So at this time, are there any other questions or comments? Feel free to raise your hand. I do see one hand raised. Let me grab it. And Renee, let me unmute you really quick and see if you had another question. Renee, are you there? It looks like you're on the computer, so, and I also see that you put that question through the question log box. So let me know if you had an additional question on top of that, and then I can unmute you. Amber, I don't see anything else coming through or no other hands raised.
Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. And once again, thank you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you on one of our future Mentor Michigan webinars. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.